Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Super excited today to talk with Shanelle Rucker. Shanelle, thank you for joining us as well. Shanelle is currently the senior campaigns manager at Honeycomb, an observability solution that shows you the patterns and outliers of how users experience your code in complex and unpredictable environments. That being said, Shanelle, I believe you have some news around a new role right now that you're planning on taking on. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my time at Honeycomb has come to an end. Honestly, it's been about 8 months, and tomorrow is my last day, and I will be going from Honeycomb to Dialpad, which is more business communications, like getting a little bit more out of the dev space. And really interesting because when I was, kind of joining Dialpad, it was like business communications and like focusing on that. But since me like starting to interview and then like getting the job, they kind of relaunched with more of an AI forward like messaging. So we'll be doing that and kind of getting into the AI space, which is like pretty interesting.
Yeah, AI is really sort of everywhere right now, right? That's like one of the big hot topics. Um, I know we talked in for other people who may watch this. We talked previously, we had a discussion around some of the challenges that Chanel's facing in terms of how do you differentiate an AI solution in a space that's constantly bringing sort of like a lot of the superficial components of AI to the forefront as sort of like the main value prop, right? So what's the value prop that you think of as you enter Dialpad? How are you feeling in terms of how you differentiate there?
Yeah. So when I first was thinking about like the AI space, kind of like you said, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so annoyed because, like everybody says they're AI forward or they have AI now. And I was, I guess concerned is too strong of a word, but I was kind of just like apprehensive about the fact that it was like AI and like kind of getting into that space. Granted, I'm coming in brand new and I don't know, their strategies or theories. So while I have trust in them, I was more like thinking like for myself, like, damn, like AI seems like it's everywhere. Everybody says it all the time. And so like one of the apprehensions I have was like, it's ubiquitous term. Like how do I market that and how do we stand out from the crowd? And then what they actually Dialpad launched was their own domain specific LLM. And so like that actually does give us a leg. It's not just an API call to ChatGPT. And so that really excited me when I actually heard that, because when it's domain specific, like that means like we have our own AI. It's not just like us leaning on ChatGPT. So that got me really excited. And then after talking to a couple members here in Demand Collective, they gave me some really good advice, which I've started to, kind of strategize about is how to use it, AI, we're saying that we have it. And it's a really great thing that we have because it is domain specific. It's not, just using ChatGPT's knowledge, but using it as like a feature rather than the main, I don't know, the main course, which I thought was really awesome because yes, the AI enables us to do what we already do better for our clients. And so to lean on it in more like this is a new feature that will overall help the business and its customers like be more innovative, like, save time, money, all the great benefits that, tools usually bring to us. So I found that really insightful to like use it as more of a feature rather than, the end all be all for the company and our messaging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's, do you feel like your experience going into like this new company with this sort of challenging new like trying to positioning around like AI, right? Do you feel like compared to other challenges in your career, how does this stack up? Does it feel like it's something that's really new and fresh to you and challenging, or do you feel like this is something that's like you're comfortable jumping into?
Yeah, definitely more comfortable jumping into. I think honestly, translating like the technical side of things into a like 5-second ad campaign is one of my like favorite things. And I've been doing it for a while, like in my career. And so it's a challenge that I like really like. Honestly, I see it as more as like a puzzle. Like, how do we translate, something that a dev takes or the person who built this, like the developer on my team, who might take, 30 minutes in a demo to explain to me, and how do I translate that into a 5-second attention grabber on a site where you might not even be looking for something like Dialpad. So yeah, honestly, I'd say like my past experiences have given me a lot of skills to do this well. And so I'm really excited because I get to like be able to use those tools that I have to tackle this.
Yeah, yeah. So like so talking about a little bit about that journey to how you sort of got here. You've worked at companies like Okta, Twitter, like you've got a pretty storied list there, right? That's maybe tell us a little bit about like what your journey looked like, how you got into marketing, and really what led you here.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I did not even think about like marketing as like a thing that I wanted to do. I went to UVA and, I'm from Virginia. And so they're very much known for like being like business school. Comm school was like what you wanted to get into. And I was like, yes, like I'm going to go to comm school. Like I'm going to take econ. I'm going to be an economist. Like I'm going to be an econ major. And I went in and like that was just, I hated every moment of it. And I would like study for hours and hours and just like still just barely make average on my thing. And I was like, okay, I hate this. And then I remember my brother who went to the same school was like, Shanelle, like, why are you putting yourself in something that you don't want to do? Like, it's just going to make the rest of your life like not fun. Like, pick something you want to do. And what I love it at the time and still do, but like reading words, really great at it. I have the most words. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, how do I make a like career out of words? And I knew it wasn't going to be writing because it's just any sort of art like that is just really hard to break into, like in terms of like authorship and journalism wasn't it for me. So I was like, I want to write the words that people like put on billboards. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And then when I was young and from Virginia and a little bit like from the rock, so I didn't really understand that that was marketing. And so anyways, went into English and then my journey led me to marketing. Out of college, I worked at a startup where I just was the social media person, which turned into like anything that had to do with like writing, I would do. And I was like, the very bottom entry level. So I was like always like write this email, like for me, the CEO to these people. Like, so I got a lot of exposure to a lot of different things and then realized I really did like paid media. And so from there, I went to an agency, Merkle, and I got trained in Google Ads and Google Ads with a very data heavy mindset. Like we were taught SQL and we weren't just like running the campaigns on Google. We were like every day I had to go and I had my like queries that I would write to understand performance. And so that kind of got me more into like the performance side of like marketing, and then went to Okta. And that kind of kicked off more of my like, I don't know, tech career, I'd say. And at Okta, at that time, we were taking our performance marketing from agency to in-house. And so I was a big part of like building what that looked like over there. So how do we set up our paid social and paid search campaigns? And what's the tracking that we're going to go with and the models that we want? And I learned a lot there. I was there for almost 4 years before I went to Twitter, which was like kind of an interesting shift, as you kind of said, is like went from, IT software to social media. But at my, the end days of my time at Okta, I was like getting really into the audience part of marketing. And I was like, the business unit that I'm working on right now, I'm targeting like XYZ users, but there's this whole subset that we're not targeting, and they were developers. And then I got really into developer marketing and then shifted over to Twitter, where they called me over to do developer marketing for their API product. So it's kind of like how I ended up in tech, and kind of then similar paths to where I am today.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's and that's a tech heavy journey too. On top of that, like, because there's so much when I think people talk about like tech and software, they think a lot of like people who aren't in it, they think of like the Ubers, the DoorDashes, all that fun stuff, right? The big brand names. And then people who are in it, I feel like we think of like the outreaches, we think of the Chili Pipers, or we think of the Apollo.ios, right? And so you're talking about like really being in the nitty gritty, like the developer space is so tech heavy within a tech space. And the marketing is so specific, right? It's a distinct language, and they don't like the fluff. They don't like, to be marketed to, so to speak. Uh, so as you start this new role, with all that in mind, like what do you think your biggest priorities are? I know you've talked in the past, about like setting up social frameworks and stuff like that, but like if there's like one thing in your first 90 days that your team around you and the company can take from your work, like what do you think that would be?
Yeah, there are actually two things that just after doing interviews and just understanding a little bit of the landscape there is video content and paid social. Um, those are priorities because one, paid social right now, with everything going on, Twitter kind of falling apart, or X now, I guess, like falling apart. Reddit, in the developer space, there's a lot of developers on Reddit, but with the strikes and the bad treatment of a lot of developers who use the API, there's a lack of trust in that platform. There's been some pulling of advertising there. So honestly, like LinkedIn is pretty much the only steady like paid social platform for at least our ICP, or what I've been told as our ICP. And so really getting a handle on how we advertise on LinkedIn is going to be really important. And I see a lot of that is like not only being able to run really strategic campaigns, but also kind of understanding how LinkedIn works. Like LinkedIn is very, kind of got to gamify, or, kind of hack LinkedIn. Like they're putting out new products, they're testing things all the time. So like, okay, like carousel ads, like they're doing really hot right now. Like let's do a lot of carousel ads. Or, I see that they're pushing this in organic. They're probably doing this as well in paid. So bringing like a lot of my just strategy around paid social, but then also like really working to kind of hack LinkedIn to get us like a little bit more incremental and, free impressions, just because we're using the new ad units or campaign types over there. And second, which kind of goes with paid social, is video. It's really interesting because I've had to fight tooth and nail at Twitter and my past two like startups that I've been at to like really focus on video content, which I think all of us as marketers like really know that video is kind of becoming kingpin of the content types right now. Like the rise of TikTok and YouTube has always been really strong. Like making sure that you have video content is important. But the problem is a lot of people don't do it tailored for those platforms. And when I came in and I was like asking them, like, do you have video strategy? And they're like, well, that's going to kind of be you. And I was like, tight. But they also were like, we have a lot of video content already. Like they did a Super Bowl ad. I guess earlier this year, and they were like, we need somebody to chop it up and like reduce, reuse, recycle. And I was like, perfect, like that's what I'm here for. So those are kind of my two priorities, and hopefully they play like really well in tandem with each other. But yeah, video and paid social.
Yeah. Are you of the mindset? I know there's like some people who try and not put all their eggs in one basket when it comes to social. Other people say, do one channel really well, then think about other channels. Like which camp do you feel like you fall into?
I'm definitely more the like second, where like more channel, or first, I think more channels is better to me, but kind of in a tiered approach. Like if we know that we have success on LinkedIn, for example, what is it? Here I'm bringing up my econ graphs, but like what is like the success that we can get without eking that like last 10% of spend? If we spend more, it's just going to get more expensive and the return starts going down. So kind of like where is the cross at our most like our best performing channel, and then what's the money that we would have spent in that just to eke out a few more conversions? Or can I take that and put it in a new channel and experiment on it? Or maybe if it's a sizable amount of money, like between two, and then experiment over there. I'm a huge experimenter. Like I love testing new things,
Mhm.
um, especially if our audience is there and I can devise, what I think is like a pretty solid plan for experimenting on that channel, then I want to do it. I won't do it just to do it. Like everybody's like, oh, how come you've still never run TikTok ads? And I'm like, well, most of my market or like my audience for the past couple of years have been like middle-aged men. So I don't necessarily think they're on TikTok. So like
Not
if I
yet.
ton of money, like I'll try it, but if I'm working against a limited budget, they're probably not there. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think, it's interesting because I think one thing that always, every time I go to a new company or I start, a demand general, I always think about how it happens every time, and I'm always surprised, is how often we have to throw out all of our assumptions about what we think we know, right, in marketing and our audiences. And so you have something like, I know like Todd Clouser from, I think he's working with Lavender, is on TikTok.
Yeah.
And you have, Refine Labs is on TikTok. A lot of these brands are exploring TikTok. And I know they just released, I just saw it this like right before we hopped on here. They released a new feature where I think you can like import your podcast into it or something like that. I don't know if you've heard that yet,
Yeah.
but it seems like there's room for experimentation. Do you feel like there's been like a big swing you took in the past, whether it was a win or a fail, right? Failing's a part of the process. Do you feel like there's one that was particularly memorable you've had?
Yeah, I would say when I was desperately trying to look for places to find developers, and it was when was this? It was basically when LinkedIn was getting really expensive. We found that this was when I worked at Conductor One, and our developer audience there was like very specific. It was like DevOps, but people who'd been in IT because it was an identity security product. And so I was like, where the hell are these people? Like, it's too expensive to advertise to kind of like this niche on LinkedIn and Reddit, too expensive. So I was like, oh, I crunched some numbers and I like worked with the DevOps people on our team at Conductor One. I was like, oh, they use DuckDuckGo. Like, okay, how can I get ads on DuckDuckGo? And it was the most intensive, like, I don't know, like huge, like squeeze for not that much, juice. But it was pretty interesting just to find out like new places to hack. And we got some good impressions. But there's a lot of with DuckDuckGo, like the way the tracking and everything they say not to be, it was very much like, yeah, let's do this. Like, I'm sure we'll get some return from this, but it was extremely hard to track and just, it was kind of a flop. I wouldn't say a failure because you couldn't really track like what's happening over there, but it was just like really interesting to go through that and be like, oh my God, we did all this work to try and like, it's a lot to set up, but it was interesting. It was fun. And like, at least I'm like, okay, now I have that kind of in my arsenal. And it was something new that I had really never done before, is to try and like hack how to only appear on DuckDuckGo. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Intense, intense, but I love it. I love it. So as far as, like something like that, like I think I previously talked to Mary Kioff, who's also a member now, and she mentioned that most companies don't know how to measure marketing's impact. And I think that's like something a lot of us, that resonates with a lot of us, right? We're constantly trying to show like, hey, yes, even though we did this and it wasn't a direct ad, that doesn't mean it didn't have an impact. How do you navigate that in your roles, and how do you really have that conversation at different levels, whether it's C-suite or with salespeople? Like, what's your experience with that?
Yeah. I'll talk more about like my experience in DG because brand is a whole nother beast, but there are tools that you can get. And usually if you're doing brand stuff like that, you have that high level buy-in. And at some point, that I feel like they really know, like, we really can't track like visits to the site from a billboard. And they're like, oh yeah, 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 yeah. So that aside, like DG is one that I think is particularly difficult to kind of explain to people. Everybody, I feel like people here know about like dark social, and like a bunch of people on LinkedIn have been like really talking about it lately, but really communicating the impact top level and like execs and whatnot. I really focus on examples and kind of take them through like a day in your life. Like, how did you hear about insert any brand here? And they'll usually kind of, think about it and, kind of I use that framework as like, okay, so like, did you actually click on an ad, or did you see it like 3 times on LinkedIn and then go Google it and then click on an ad there, or maybe organic? And then you chatted with somebody over a drift bot or any sort of bot, and then you went to your email, and then you clicked a link from there. So kind of taking them through that journey really helps highlight all the different paths to conversion that there are. And I find that is usually pretty successful with people who are not necessarily like in the daily weeds of marketing. Same thing with sales actually as well. In DG, like I've been working, obviously we work really close with sales, and one of the conflicts that I have there is usually like, I want no, like, don't take my pipeline. And I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to take your pipeline. In fact, you can have it, like put your name all over it. I just want to make sure that you have as much as I can give you. And so, yeah, an anecdote, like, damn, like people just really wanting to stake their flag in pipeline. And I'm like, you can have it all. But yeah, I find like examples work for them as well. I had this one slide with like UTMs that I used to show where it's like, all right, I'm going to walk you through you buying a pair of shoes and like why you bought Jordans instead of like Birkenstocks. And usually kind of examples like that work too. So a lot of examples is how I communicate it. And then, other marketing people, I'm just like, oh, we just like to have arguments about, which model of attribution works the best. So kind of long-winded answer, but I feel like just, yeah, mostly examples work really well for communicating like an impact, because everybody is marketed to all the time. But the good kind, you don't really realize it until you're like ready to buy.
Yeah. So on the topic of attribution, I have another question. I'm going to come back to it though, but on the topic of attribution, while we're there, like where do you mentioned dark social, right? That's like some people see that as like a buzzword. Other people are like, it's the way of the future. Like, your feelings around attribution? One, is it necessary? Two, to what degree? And three, how do you break that up? Do you even believe in like departmental attribution, or more of a what was the last touch that drove them to reach out to us type deal? Do you believe in multi-touch, all that fun stuff?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a lot. I know.
No, yeah. Wait, so what was your first question again? I'm
But it
like,
was basically essentially one, like, do you think attribution is necessary? And if so, how so?
yes, I do believe it's necessary. And mostly too for communicating to like anybody above me that my programs are working and that I need more money if they are working. So I'm like, secures buy-in on some level. And then two, for me, I kind of mentioned in my past, like the me constantly pulling SQL queries and data and working with that like really instilled a huge like data driven mindset in me from a very like young age in my career. And honestly, Merkle had a lot of great data, not only from like the 3 clients I worked on, but it was super awesome because, my teammate who was working on another client in a different industry, they had a bunch of data points and, could map out these journeys, and we could compare them and be like, oh, like I see this happening over in the same industry. And like, I see this. So data is huge to me. And like like trends are like huge to me as well. How so? Like I just said trends. And that's like, for me, I'm like multi-touch is goal, but it's kind of hard. And it's like just really difficult to set up after something else has already been in place, at least for a while. Like if first touch has been in place for like 3 years, then trying to like get people to mindset shift is like really, really hard. And every time I try to do that, whether it's last touch, first touch, or, last touch with like an influence point, it's just always hard because it's a huge mindset shift and you need like everyone on board and lots of data in order to show like, can't like, this is why we need to do it, because we're saying like LinkedIn is, trash. And in reality, like I'm seeing 30 clicks. We know it takes 5 clicks per person in order to turn into a demo. And like, without even knowing that, like backing that out, like I can show you that LinkedIn is actually doing stuff for us. So, like it's so important to me. And I'm like, I will like fight for like many points, that we can afford at the time in my company for an attribution model. So that like we can just get visibility into what our stuff is doing and kind of like, and back to like fight that, yes, my stuff is working, like go over there. And I would love like multi-departmental attribution, but usually I just start with like marketing specific, so I can just prove out my campaigns to, its stakeholders and, work from there. But that's kind of like my thoughts on it.
Yeah, yeah. Budget, the age-old fight. Marketing always the first budget to get cut, right? If there was if your budget got cut to the barest bones, what's the one thing you'd love to keep?
Oof. Um, Money for making content and money for search.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That and why is that? That's an interesting pair. I'm curious.
Yeah, money for creating content because like you can hack some social sites, and especially like I learned that at my first startup ever. I would reach out to people and be like, "Hey, would you mind featuring this or posting this?" And it was very much like selling my content that I had created at my company to them. And while it was a lot of work and it was like not scalable at all, I was able to get some exposure for free 99. And so it was like, okay, like that helped a lot. And getting some eyeballs on the content, then taking that back and be like, okay, like they really like this. It gets you data, it gets you possible budget. So being able to churn out content in an intentional way and like also several pieces at a time is important. And then search for me, I see it as just Google search has so many levers. Out of all the advertising platforms, it's got the most sophisticated like levers you can pull. And even being able to geo target and do some like assist to your guerrilla marketing is huge. I like have run, I kind of have like my own side business, but I've run Google search for like local workspaces, like local boutique workspaces, and just geofencing one zip code with like $500 a month. You can get two incremental like paying members, which is huge for a small business. So it's like, kind of expanding that to a company who doesn't need like membership in person, like is very valuable. So those are probably the two things that I would say.
Yeah, yeah. What and if you don't mind me asking, what's the side hustle? Is that related to workspaces?
No, so I do basically kind of teach a person to fish, and they'll eat for life kind of model of like consulting. But it's for like local businesses in my area. So like restaurants, like workspaces, just be like, hey, you could really like level up, your presence online, Yelp, whatever. Just teaching them how to like improve their digital presence, and advertising if they're like eventually willing to put money into it.
That's amazing, actually. I never hear so like you always hear about people being like fractional this or that, like I was a fractional director at one point. There's like people, everything feels so like sort of in a bubble, the tech software bubble, right? And we're all sort of living in it. So that's really interesting that you're working with companies who are sort of outside that medium. What, I'm sorry, I'm really happy about this. Like what are the muscles you feel like you get to flex doing that you don't normally get to flex in your full-time world?
Branding actually,
Uh,
like I see that as like a huge thing. So how this kind of came about was when I was working at Okta. It was like in the pandemic, and I was working from home and like doing a lot of like I would work at my desk all day, and then I was like, dang, like I want to do some like other stuff. Like I'm tired of like when the world was starting to open up. And so I took a job at one of my favorite bars slash restaurants like nearby called Brixton, and I was a server there for like a year
mhm.
on top of like working with Okta. And they knew that. And so like a lot of times, like I'd be talking with the manager about what I do at Okta, and they were like, "Ooh, can you help us?" And I was like, totally, like I'd love to. And like the first thing I was like branding, like the flyers that you give out for events, your social media, even your they're all different. And so like when people leave and you have this good name, Brixton, like people get different images in their head. Like some people are like, oh yeah, Brixton, like the neon sign, or like the gold or the white or like the red. And I was like, even like that was my biggest thing, was like, okay, like let's cohesivize like your brand so people all like remember Brixton as like the neon sign that is red. And like starting there, which is like super fun. In DG, I don't get to do like a lot of branding or have like a hand in how, you know, branding translates to demand, which is like a weird thing to say, but that's like one muscle that I get to, you know, like stretch, flex when I work with clients there. So it's really fun. It's like simple things that they're just like, yeah, duh, that makes sense. And you're like, yeah, so like let's do it together. I'll put together like a quick little like palette of 4 colors and like a font that you should just, you know, save this in a slide or a Google Doc and then just like make everything off of it. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's amazing. That's like I always have family members who always come, they go, "You do marketing, right? Look at this logo. How does that look?" And I go, that's not how. Never great. Looks great. Uh that's so you're doing all of this though, like are there ever moments where you feel like there are components of that world of marketing that you think our world of marketing is not currently utilizing in the way they should, in the way that like D2C marketing, right? A lot of people like to make the comparison to B2B and say B2B is sort of antiquated in a lot of senses. And do you feel like there are things from that world that they're doing you'd love to bring over to this world?
yeah, a lot of the silly stuff, like, and I think, you know, kind of a jab I had earlier was like, oh yeah, like, you know, my audience of, you know, 60-year-old men aren't necessarily on TikTok, and, you know, lavender is. And I think it kind of goes back to that like branding, like deciding what kind of voice and tone you want to have at the beginning, kind of allows you to have more of a like try more of those like D2C things. I saw a restaurant the other day, they had flyers that they folded up a certain way and it looked like a wallet that was dropped on the ground with like money sticking out of it. And when people
Oh,
would pick it up, they'd be like, oh yeah, a wallet, but then they'd realize it was paper. And then when they pulled it, it like, you know, kind of opened and it was like the menu and, you know, whatever. And I was like, that's awesome. And whatever, maybe throwing paper on the ground isn't the greatest, but still, I was like, the idea is there. Like,
yeah.
I feel like in B2B, we don't kind of, and like my first like clients and like marketing was all like D2C. And so I'm like, I miss some of the like random stuff that you would do that was super localized, like, oh, sticking up flyers, or, you know, going to a bar and, you know, talking about like, you know, samples. And, you know, it's harder to do with software technology, but I think allowing people the space to like experiment and kind of think really outside of the box, or like adopt some D2C marketing techniques could probably go a long way. Because when I think about it, like each company that I start joining, like the buyers get closer in my age, or like, you know, I don't know, like generation, so that I can kind of be like, one day, like soon, I'll be the buyer for like marketing products. Like I'll be like, yes, for this. So it's like how I like fun things. Like I like to be like cleverly marketed too. So like that's something, I don't know, kind of keep an open mind and like try the silly things, I'd say, is like, and silly is the wrong word, but, you know, try the out of the box, or like not, you know, formal or like typical things. Take some inspo from the B2C people. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that too, where you go, I like the silly things. It's like, I'm sure, I remember being in college, like you mentioned you were an English major who became a marketer, which is way more common than you would expect. I feel like I meet a lot of marketers, my old boss being one of them, and uh they say like once you become really literary, right, for lack of a better word, it becomes difficult to enjoy certain things, right? Certain books, because once you know something's bad, or at least you have that perception, you're like, ugh. But then when it hits, it really hits, right? You appreciate it on a way deeper level. And I'm sure that mentality carries over as a marketer, where you go, when you see something, you're like, that is one heck of a campaign. Like, have you had a wow moment recently where you saw someone doing something and you were just like, that's the kind of marketing people need to be doing in this space, whether it's in our space or not. But if it's in our space in particular, it would be great.
Yeah, there were two. And one of them was the campaign in what was this, 2021
Mm.
that Twitter launched, that was basically where they took tweets like where people said, for instance, like the one I can think of is like Niall Horan, and he was like, I want to be like a famous singer or something like that. Like he tweeted that on his personal. And then I forget what the campaign is called, but I want to say it was like meant to be or tweet, I forget. Anyways, but basically it was like these tweets from people before they were famous talking about how they wanted to like accomplish these goals or be famous.
Mm.
And then they just posted them on billboards and people like immediately knew. And I was like, that's genius. Like you're using your own content, like to just, nothing's net new except for the strategy and like obviously paying for the billboard spaces. But I
Yeah.
thought it was like very brilliant because it was very simple. It was self-contained, and like it didn't take a lot of like mind jumps to get to like understand, like we all like knew, or I did, like I knew Niall, like, and they used a bunch of different people in different industries, like
Yeah.
Niall, they used like Jay-Z, I think, a lot of different people. And it was like, oh, we all knew that this person was not famous at one point, and they had a Twitter that was like with 100 followers at some point, and now they have like 1 million. So it was just like, I love that. I was like, oh my God, it's so like chef's kiss. Like it was just like so self-contained and simple, and like didn't require me to think that hard. And I loved that one. I'll have to like find out what it was called because the name is escaping me right now. Um, and then another one that I thought was really interesting is one I've been seeing in SF is, and the company's called Vercel or Vercel. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's VERCEL. And they put these billboards around town that were all black with just like some weird looking code on it. There was no brand on some of them. But it was like down this one street that I walk every day.
Mm.
And the first one I see, I'm like, what the hell is this? It's just black with some like triangles and a tilde. And like, I don't know what this is. Like,
San
it looks
Francisco.
cool. Yeah, I was like, looks cool, kind of spooky. What is this? And then as I kept going down, like there was another billboard like later on that said, whatever it was, like cloud something and the name. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's what that thing was back there. Still have no idea what they do because I haven't looked them up, and I knew it was like something for, I think maybe something that I don't have to like, I don't need. So I was like, but I was like, oh my gosh, it's really interesting how they use that space of like the first one I saw, like walking down that street was like, I don't fucking know what that is, but it made me stop and think like, what kind of marketer doesn't put their brand like or their name like on this billboard? Like, what the hell? But then I kept going down and it was right there. And I was like, oh, that's genius. They used the like 1-2 punch to like get my attention and then also like deliver the answer I was looking for, a couple blocks back. So I thought that was like a really interesting use of like space.
Yeah, yeah, that's I feel like we don't in software and tech, we just don't always have that opportunity or at least that way of thinking, right? Because you mentioned localization. And I think companies are either, in my experience, two modes where they're either trying to land grab SMBs and they're trying to create that self-service motion as much as possible, or you have the people going exclusively after enterprises, right? And if you're an SMB, you're out of luck. Sorry, you don't get a customer rep, you don't get a this, you don't get a that. We don't actually care that much, but we'll take your money. Like that is the sort of stuff I think that really resonates. Even if it obviously it doesn't sound like you were the intended audience, but like you're talking about it, you're telling people about it, and that's what a lot of people don't get, right? Is that it's not always just the intended audience who needs to see it.
Yeah, agreed. I'm like, I mean, notoriety, like you could be the wrong audience, but it gets people talking either way.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I don't. I think my last question for you will be: what do you feel is like your proudest achievement in your career, or your biggest campaign, or your biggest, just the thing when you think back on everything you've done as a marketer that makes you go, "That was it. That was the moment."
Honestly, I would say it was probably, it was just kind of like a light bulb moment and like a new strategy, like that I was trying that like performed way beyond my expectations. So when I worked at Okta, I worked on this business unit called like customer identity access management. And it was always kind of given the like tiny part of the budget, and we couldn't really figure out how to make it like land. It was like, I think my second year there. And it was like, okay, like we got to figure out how to grow Siam. This is like a priority for the business. So I got a little bit more budget, and they're like, all right, Shanelle, like, you know, we need to grow the pipeline from your campaigns. I was like, okay, like I got this. And so I went to people in sales, like SDRs, AEs, people who had been there for a while, people who hadn't. And I was like, how do you sell Siam? And I just remember doing this, like going down to the 7th floor and just like taking notes and setting up all these meetings with salespeople, and just like taking down notes and listening to calls, and basically constructed like this Google search and paid social like campaign out of it, with content in paid social that I was like, we need to show them this in order to get them to Google this. And people were like, okay, like whatever, like I had small budgets, so they're like, you can't do anything, like this is already not performing, so you can't actually like hurt anything, like we don't really care. So they didn't really pay attention to me like outside of it, because they're like,
Yeah.
you got this much per quarter, like you can't really hurt anything. So I did. And I remember like creating this deck, showing it to my boss, and him being like, okay, like go for it, like it can work, like again, like anything, like everything's an experiment, like just try anything. And it did. And I was like super proud of it, because we took, what was it, like a 200% increase in pipeline from those campaigns, like quarter over quarter. And like people were like, oh shit, that strategy worked. And so then we were able to roll it out kind of to other campaigns for the other business units. But I remember being super proud and being like, yeah, like polling a bunch of different people and like putting intent and focus in one campaign produces so much more dividends than if I just was like, let's just keep running and like just try and get even more campaigns and like maybe split up the audience and just do more, which is what kind of the strategy was previously. But I was like, yes, if we just focus and put more intention behind like 1 or 2 campaigns, then, I think this could work. And it paid off. And I just remember being like, yeah, like when that pipeline came in at the quarter and there were greens across the board in my postmortem, I was like, yes, like I love this. Yeah. Like
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
my
We
favorite
pat
thing.
yourself on
So
the back. You deserve it. That's amazing.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been super great to talk to you. I'm always leaving our conversations impressed, and so this has been great. Thank you again, Shanelle.
Yeah, happy to philosophize and talk about campaigns and marketing. So thanks.